You're listening to the Road to Wisdom podcast, weaving stories told by wonderful minds about all things motherhood, health, intimacy, politics, nature, and everything in between.
Join us on an adventure discovering unique experiences that we can learn from to enhance the ways in which we live.
We are your hosts, Chloe
and Keshia.
Hey guys, welcome to today's episode. We are just adding in a little pre-recording here today because the subject matter that we are talking about is actually quite, I don't know how to say it, other than sticky and potentially offensive and potentially
I think
open to
it's emotional,
upsetting people because it is quite emotional. And
we're
talking about abortion and babies dying and just some sensitive content. And we don't usually do this type of pre-recording or filter ourselves in any way. But we did realize that during this conversation, we did say some things that could easily be misconstrued. And so we just wanted to take this time to have a quick chat before and kind of just iron out where those points are and kind of just clarify why we actually took this conversation on in the first place and why we wanted to talk about this. Basically, like we're having a conversation about abortion, but it's more so from the perspective of there's a situation going on in Australia where babies are being born alive after failed abortions. And we wanted to talk about this because firstly, we had no idea that this was happening, and we had no idea it was happening in Australia, and we had no idea how often this was happening. And so we obviously think of abortion, or we did think of abortion as just this thing that just happens. It's like you take a pill and it's gone and nothing really happens to you. And the more we talk, the more that Keshia and I kind of spoke about this, we realized that we both really had no idea what the process of an abortion was, and we had absolutely no idea that some of these things were happening. And so
I guess we were really shocked because and this is something that I just wanted to explain to everyone before we go into the episode, because you and I have never experienced an abortion, but the way that we were speaking about it off air, the way that abortion was sold to me personally was that you can just get one, and if you accidentally fall pregnant, you can just get one, and it just kind of you can just stop that situation from happening. And it was, it's just a heavy period, and this is kind of how I felt it was marketed to me. And so I guess I just want to clarify that a lot of the comments that I make is coming from that background. I think that one of the ways that we can be misconstrued is that people don't talk about abortion. Women who have experienced don't really talk about it. I think it's a very small number of women who have experienced that process who do talk about it. And doing the research for this recording, I realized how commonplace it is. I think the statistics are 1 in 4 women, or maybe it's 1 in 4 pregnancies, will end in abortion. And that's huge. So I think we just wanted to acknowledge that a lot of women listening to this recording may have gone through this procedure, and this is not a judgment on anyone who has done that. I think personally, I was taking this conversation from the point of being a mum to 3 girls who I'm trying to protect from ever having to go through that. And that was, and I think a lot of the comments that I made came from shock of what these procedures are, and that we are able in Australia to have an abortion up until birth. So I think I wanted to clarify that.
And also just to context, by the way, after we recorded this episode, it was made that all states in Australia now have legalized abortion up until birth, which is another wild statistic just to add to the conversation because, so when you listen to it, I think we did talk about the laws in each state, but that has now changed as of like last week. But yeah, basically this is just to preface the conversation with it. It's not of a judgment. Like I've been personally in a position where I fell pregnant and I was like far out. Like
we both have.
Like we both have. Like you can share your story if you want to, but it's been something that I've considered. Like, oh my God, I don't think I can do this. I think I would just get an abortion. So like it's not that we don't understand why people would want them or even make choices to get them.
Feel like they need to. Yeah.
Feel like they need to do it. It's more of just like an inquiry as to why this is kind of happening the way it's happening and some of the consequences that we actually have no idea that are possible. One being that babies can actually survive an abortion and they're not, then they don't have any rights, human rights, because basically the intention was to do what an abortion does. I hope that this episode is received with good intention and that those who have experienced an abortion by choice for no other reason than they simply wanted one don't find offense in this and know that we're all responsible for our choices, whatever that outcome may be.
Yeah, 100%. I think we have covered everything. So with no further ado, here is our episode with Joanna, and I will actually put a little note on it. Maybe be mindful if you're listening around children. This is probably not the episode to do that. Thank you guys for sticking with us, and we hope that you can receive this information.
Welcome everyone to the Road to Wisdom podcast. Today we are bringing you a interesting discussion, an important one at that. We have Dr. Joanna Howe with us today, and we are going to hear about something that's quite new to me and quite actually shocking. A friend of mine introduced this situation to me and I have been thinking about it ever since. And to be completely honest, I had no freaking idea this was happening in our country, and it's been happening in our country for so long. And since we talk about women-centered problems and things all the time.
Informed consent.
And all of those things, I feel like this conversation has a home here. And so, yes, we have Joanna Howe, who is a professor of law and also a mother of 5, which means we have 15 kids between us. So it's a miracle that we're all here. But basically, Joanna's work is currently about a bill that's you're trying to get put through, which basically acknowledges that babies are being born alive after failed abortions. And it seems like a really messy fight for you at the moment, because I feel like a lot of it's getting caught up with the pro and against abortion fight. And I just feel like, to preface this whole thing, it would be good to just make it clear we don't really want to have an abortion argument today. No. Like, we can share our views, probably not going to like it, but this is like just needs to be, I think, highlighted because it's kind of above that and it's not really about that. So yeah, Joanna, welcome and thank you for being here.
Yes.
I'm good. Thanks for touching something that a lot of people don't want to touch, because it is easier just not to know. And so it's very controversial, but also I think something that everybody should know, and once you know it, it's hard to unhear it.
I thought we'd just start with what is it and what is happening?
What is a failed abortion?
Yeah. And what kind of just, I guess, get us up to speed, or get our listeners up to speed that would have literally no idea what is happening.
Okay. So the purpose of an abortion, I think, is where we should start, because you don't know whether something's failed unless you know what it's intended to do. So the purpose of an abortion is to end the life of the human being that is growing inside of a woman's uterus. And there are different methods of abortion that are used. And so depending on the method, the likelihood of a child being born alive is greater. So this is not going to happen with a baby that's pre-12 weeks, because pre-12 weeks, the methods that are used kill the baby, so the baby doesn't come out alive. And this is more about the second and the third trimester. So there's two ways it can happen. One way is in the case of Jessica Jane. So maybe I'll use a story that's from real life so that you can kind of understand it. So with Jessica, her mother already had children, and she was concerned about her future and her career. And she went to the GP in Darwin and got referred for an abortion to the hospital. She told the GP she was about 19 weeks. An abortion was legal at that gestation in the Northern Territory. So she went then to the hospital, where, because they thought this baby was 19 weeks, they gave her the first pill, which is mifepristone, and it might be misoprostol. I always get those two names confused, but there's basically two abortion pills that you take, and they both start with M. The first pill the woman takes, and it removes the nutrient supply for the baby, and the baby then is not receiving nutrients and is meant to pass away inside her. And then the second pill induces labour, so it brings labour on early. And so she took both of these pills, and then she delivers this baby in the hospital. The abortionist who had given her the pills isn't at the hospital at the time, but a midwife is delivering this baby, and the midwife expects to be delivering a stillborn baby of about 19 weeks gestation. But Nurse Williams, who delivers this baby in the Northern Territory Hospital, discovers that the baby is a little baby girl who has good ABCAR scores. Do you guys know what they are? You know, when the baby comes out and it's their responsiveness and things. So the baby's got good ABCAR scores. The baby's wriggling and crying and moving around and looks older than 19 weeks. Nurse Williams calls the abortionist and asks him, "What do I do? This baby is alive." And she's quite shocked and distressed because she hasn't come across that before in an abortion situation. And the abortionist says, "So the baby's alive?" And he says, "I'll see her in the morning." And Nurse Williams hadn't told the doctor the baby's gender, so by that she knew he meant the mother. He didn't give any instructions about how to care for the baby. So she wasn't quite sure what to do, but she wrapped the baby in a blanket, who was called Jessica, and then she put Jessica on a metal kidney dish in an empty room. And Jessica lay there for 80 minutes, and the nurse would go in every 15 to 20 minutes to check on the baby. So we know all of this because of the coroner's report by Greg Kavanagh, who I've spoken to on the phone about this situation. He says it's one of the most distressing cases he had seen in his over, I think, 20 years as a coroner. And he remembers, he's retired now, but he remembers it very well. And after 80 minutes, Jessica passes away. So that's a situation where it's definitely a failed abortion. The intention was to kill the baby, but the baby came out alive. And you know, I think about that case, and I think about Jessica. She's out of gestation where she can feel pain. She knows her mother's voice. She responds to light and sound. She would have been in the place where she was safest, and then she comes out into this world, and then she's placed on this kidney dish. And it wasn't like she was held for the 80 minutes of her short life. She was left in an empty room, and I just think of the distress that she must have been under. Also, the coroner's report indicates that she probably wasn't 19 weeks. She was more like 22, 23, 24 weeks. So with the advances we have in medical science now, we know that's the gestation of viability, or it's the threshold of viability. So with intervention, Jessica could have lived and could be alive today. So that's an example of how it can happen. But earlier this year, I helped draft a bill for the Queensland Parliament that said if a baby survives their abortion, they're to be treated no differently to any other baby. So I think of it as a birth equality bill, that if you're born, you're equal to all the other babies and you get the same level of care. In that inquiry, because after the bill was introduced, they sent it to a parliamentary inquiry. It was very interesting because Dr. Alicia Broome, who is one of the main abortionists in Queensland, she was representing the Royal College for Obstetricians. She gave evidence, and you can see it on my Instagram because I've got it pinned, because it was kind of mind-blowing. She gave evidence that this is actually, in some cases, the second scenario, it's an intended outcome of abortion, that the baby is born alive. So because not all hospitals have specialists who have the ability to inject the baby's heart with potassium chloride and kill the baby in utero, they actually, between 14 and 22 weeks, they'll intentionally just give the woman 2 pills. They'll skip the injection, and the injection is known as feticide. It's another method of late abortion, and the purpose of feticide is to kill the baby in utero, give the mother the second pill, which sends her into labour, and then she delivers a dead baby. But they skip that because it's cheaper and they don't always have the people to do it. And so then they intentionally give the mother the 2 pills, and then the baby is intentionally delivered alive and then is left to die, that is not entitled to care, is pre-viable, but is also pain capable and can respond to their mother's voice, and they can feel things. So I was really shocked by that, hearing her testimony, that they actually do this as an intentional method of abortion, that these babies between 13 weeks and 22 weeks will be put in a room, and occasionally midwives and nurses, if they can, will hold them. But then if the call bell rings and they have to go, then they have to attend to that. And the babies aren't entitled to actual care like a morphine on the lip to alleviate their pain. So I can understand people are probably listening and thinking this can't be true, and also how shocking, like how barbaric it is really to do this to a little baby.
I have so many questions around this, because I guess the first one being, I didn't actually know that in Australia you could get an abortion that late unless it was for medical reasons. Could you explain the laws around it? I'm sure it differs state to state, but could you give us an indication of, the laws around a late-term abortion?
Yeah. So what state are you guys from?
We're in New South Wales.
Border.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, border.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm in South Australia, but the place which introduced abortion up to birth first was Victoria in 2008, which said that you can have an abortion throughout all 40 weeks of pregnancy, right up until birth, so long as it met a psychosocial reason, which is a reason that affects a woman's well-being. So it can be homelessness, relationship breakdown, depression, anxiety. It can really, it's a wide range of reasons. In fact, it's hard to think of something that doesn't meet that, because, for example, if I've from an Indian family, which I am from India, and in my family I'm not in my immediate family, but in a hypothetical scenario, I receive a lot of pressure to produce sons, and so I know that my baby's going to be a girl, and I'm getting a lot of pressure from my family, my in-laws, my husband. That affects my psychosocial well-being, and I can go in for the abortion to kill my child because of the fact that the baby's a girl, but also because of the pressure that I'm receiving. And there is a La Trobe University study from Melbourne which actually shows that in some ethnic communities, 125 boys are being born to 100 girls, and the ratio should be roughly equal. And there's 100 million girls missing worldwide because of sex-selective abortion. So psychosocial can virtually mean anything. And that law has now been introduced everywhere. So Queensland introduced it in 2018, where you guys are. In New South Wales, it was 2019. In my state of South Australia, it was 2021. So it means that you can have an abortion up to birth for virtually any reason. And after viability, so after 22 weeks, typically you need 2 doctors to approve it. But when they talk about this 2-doctor rule, it's not like there's any reason that the second doctor or the first doctor can give for not approving the abortion, because there's no criteria in the law that protects the human rights of the child that's viable. And often what happens typically is a woman will go to a hospital for that late-term abortion, and the second doctor will be on site, and they don't have to see the woman. They cite the file and they sign off. And so it's not a very robust process at all. And then people will say, oh, well, no one's getting a late-term abortion for frivolous reasons. And I get that. I don't think women are, on the whole, getting abortions for frivolous reasons late in pregnancy. They've carried this baby for a long time. And people say, oh, but these babies were going to die anyway. But if you look at the data from South Australia, where I'm from, 80% of late-term abortions kill healthy babies with physically healthy mums, with mums that don't have a life-threatening condition at all. And the process for a late-term abortion is to have the woman in hospital to do an ultrasound to find the baby's heart, specifically the left ventricle, and then the abortionist will fill a long needle with potassium chloride, and using the ultrasound, they'll inject the potassium chloride into the baby's heart. The baby will have a cardiac arrest, like a heart attack, and then they will give the mother the labour-inducing drugs, and she delivers the baby vaginally, stillborn, and the midwife receives a dead baby who in some states like South Australia will be placed in the bin. So that can happen to a baby, between 22 weeks and 40 weeks. And I've spoken and interviewed midwives, and people can see it on my YouTube channel, who talk about the trauma of having to do this. They just feel so traumatized by delivering a dead baby. So that's the method of abortion, late term and up to birth. That was the question, wasn't it? Sorry.
Yeah.
The laws around.
I absolutely
I had no idea that we could do that.
Yeah.
I thought it was like that you had to kind of get one around the 12, like before the 12 weeks.
And then I thought that it was more like the 20 weeks, like when you get that 20-week scan, and if there was like some severe abnormality or like terminating for medical reasons, like I thought that was like the latest possible, and then post that you got a child.
What was the reason that they did this? Do you know why they brought these laws in to extend the possibility of an abortion up to 40 weeks? Like, it seems...
Yeah. It is really extreme, and I don't think most Australians would agree with it. I only started speaking up about it in 2021 when South Australia introduced it. I just felt like it was too far. And we had the experience in South Australia from the other states. So we could see that nearly 1 in 2 in Victoria over an 11-year period, these were healthy babies being killed. There was also a baby at 37 weeks in Victoria who was perfectly healthy, who was injected with potassium chloride for a psychosocial reason. And the thing is, I had a baby, my second child was born at 37 weeks, and I held him. And that was a big wake-up call for me, knowing that was legal under the law and that these babies have no voice or no rights. The thing is, it's so unnecessary, because late in pregnancy, from 23 weeks, but certainly from the 3rd trimester, you can just skip the injection of potassium chloride and just give the mother the labour-inducing drugs and deliver the baby alive. And then the baby can be put in the NICU and get neonatal care, and they've got a 96% chance of survival. And then the mother can receive the care that she needs. So there is no medically necessary reason late in pregnancy to have an abortion. And so when you say, why did they introduce it? The only reason I can think of is that there's an ideological view that abortion is healthcare. And I think when women, because I used to be pro-choice when I was at uni, you sort of think abortion is abortion is abortion. You don't realise there's these different methods and they happen at different times. Every abortion kills a human being, but it is going to look and feel very different at 6 weeks to 12 weeks. The method between 12 and 22 weeks, if it's not the pills method that I talked about earlier, so that method of taking 2 pills and then delivering the baby, they should come out dead, but increasingly they can come out alive the older they are. The other method is actually really brutal. It's a dilation and evacuation method, where the woman is lying there and the abortionist, the doctor, goes in with metal forceps and he wrenches a limb, the leg, off the baby and pulls it out, and wrenches the other leg. I'm sorry, it's really brutal. And then pulls the baby out piece by piece, and then crushes the skull. And then a white substance appears, and so he sort of knows that he or she knows they've done the job. But then they actually have to assemble the body parts on a tray to make sure they haven't left anything inside the woman, because otherwise that would be dangerous for her and it could cause sepsis. And that's called a dilation and evacuation. that is just the most, like, that method breaks my heart, because these babies can feel pain. Like, and in my state, that happened to 358 babies in the most recent calendar year that we have data for. And I just think that we've got to find a different way. I know you guys didn't want to talk about abortion. You wanted to talk about what happens afterwards.
Well, it's all the same, right? Yeah. I mean, like, I feel like it's also been a really loaded topic of conversation, especially with Trump being elected as president. And obviously everybody feels like freaking like personally attacked by this concept of like abortion should be everyone's right. But like, I just feel like there's really muddy waters when we talk about women's rights and our right to have an abortion. Like, there's a lot of layers here. It's one is like, is it our right to have this, or is it just like, do we even know what we're doing? Like, when we say it's my right, it's my body, it's my choice, it's my right to have, you know, full autonomy over my womb, but do women really have the opportunity to make informed choices when they've had that pregnancy, they don't want it for whatever reason, and they need to make this, they've made this decision? I just feel like I'm a 35-year-old woman and I don't know any of this. And I've been pregnant 5 times. I've had 5 babies. But I just feel like it's a really watered down experience that so many women.
You said it perfectly before, Joanna. Like the way that the information is given to women, especially those who haven't ever been pregnant before. It's like, abortion is abortion is abortion. And so when we send our girls out into the world, it's like, well, worst case scenario, you just get an abortion. Like, it's just, that's how it's so flippant. If I wasn't ready and whatever, the situation wasn't right, it wasn't the right time for me or whatever. And it's like, no one actually tells you what it entails. Like, it's still a pregnancy. And I think a lot of the terminology used around it too, like, I mean, I was listening to a few podcasts to prep for this interview, and a lot of the terminology doctors would use in that situation is products of conception. Like, we won't even use pregnancy and baby, or like it'll be fetus or embryo, or like really words that disconnect you from the process that your body is going through, which is pregnancy every single time. And pregnancy is the growing of life within your womb every single time. And I resonate with definitely was pro-choice, and I, like, maybe to an extent still am, but I'm pro-choice so long as women know the full extent and are completely informed about the decision that they're making when they go into these situations. And and your Instagram page absolutely blew my mind, because I thought I didn't know anything about abortion, like, you know, years ago. And, you know, once Chloe showed me your work, I was just like, oh, I know nothing. And how do we as women not know this? But I think the late term abortion stuff is really muddy, because I think that there's probably a lot of women who are very pro-choice and very like against late term. Like, it gets really hairy. So can I ask, how often are we seeing late term abortions? Like, and can you define late term for me?
Okay. So late term abortion would be after 20 weeks. That's what the Royal College of Obstetricians says. And I guess after 20 weeks, you have a baby that is fully formed and developed, and they just need time for those, you know, parts of their body to grow, but they've got everything that they need, and they're very close to that threshold of viability. If you went in with a baby at 22 weeks and your waters had broken, and there was some kind of emergency situation, they wouldn't kill the baby and then take the baby out. They would deliver the baby via emergency C-section, because you're on the threshold of viability. One of the women I follow online, Leah Darrow, she had her little baby Sylvester at 22 weeks, and I've been following that journey, and they've just been discharged from hospital, and you know, each week you see Sylvester growing and growing, because at 22 weeks it is possible. So a late-term abortion is about a baby that could survive outside the womb with care, who is intentionally killed. How often does it happen? Okay, so something that people will say is it's extremely rare, but when they talk about rare, I guess what they're thinking about is it as a proportion of the total number of abortions. So late-term abortions are between 1% and 2% of the total number of abortions in Australia, but there are 88,000 babies who are killed every year in Australia through abortion. It's the leading cause of death, but it's not recognised in the official statistics. Cardiovascular disease is listed as the official cause of death, and that's because we don't see these babies as distinct human beings. But it's 88,000 a year. So 1% or 2% of 88,000 is still quite a lot, isn't it, guys? Like it's a reasonable amount. I mean, I think if it was one baby, it would feel like quite a lot. One baby that was injected with potassium chloride and delivered dead, or one baby who survived the abortion and was left to die on a metal kidney dish. To me, that's too many. But it's not one baby. In South Australia, where I'm from, they legislated abortion up to birth in 2021. It took a while for the law to actually be enacted, and so July 2022 is when it started. But in the first 18 months, 57 babies were killed after 23 weeks and up until birth. So that's 57. And you think about that, 57 babies, it's 2 classrooms, 2 primary school year 1 classrooms. And then of those 57, 45 were healthy babies, no congenital abnormality of any description, and the mother did not have a life-threatening condition. And even if she had had a life-threatening condition, they could have done an emergency C-section and taken that baby out. That is the quickest, safest thing to do for the mother. So when they say that abortion up to birth is necessary to save women's lives, they're actually lying and they're being misleading. But I think the reason they say it is because they're talking about mental health. They're saying that a mother is coming to the hospital and she's saying, I'm going to kill myself or harm myself unless you end this pregnancy. I need this abortion. Because it's never medically necessary from a physical health perspective once the baby's viable. But the thing is, I had really bad postnatal depression. I don't know if you guys ever experienced it, but I was hospitalised for it for one of my children. But if I had wanted to kill my baby, my little baby boy, because I was really struggling, that would have been it might not have been murder, it might have been manslaughter because of the lack of mens rea intention, but it's a crime. And in fact, when I was hospitalised for severe postnatal depression, they had me under watch. Like my husband would make these jokes about it being like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and me being in a mental asylum. We make jokes. That's how he and I sort of survived tough times. But basically, I was under watch. Like me and the other girls who were really depressed and anxious, they had videos. They would check on us every sort of hour. And that was part of the duty of care to my little baby boy who was a couple of days old, and also their care for me. But yet, from 20 weeks up until birth, if a mother presents and says, I'm really struggling, I've got severe mental anguish, I need you to kill my baby so that I can be okay, it's legal. And they do it instead of bringing that baby out alive and respecting the human rights of that child and the human rights of the mother. So, in answer to your question, how many, it's significant. If you look at an 11-year period in Victoria between 2010 and 2020, and the stats for Victoria and Queensland over that period, it's close to 5,000. It's 4,929 babies killed after 20 weeks and up until birth. So that's a lot of babies. One shark attack victim gets on the front page of the paper, but these babies who are being killed every day, some of whom are born alive and then left to die. And on my YouTube, you can see an interview with a New South Wales midwife who talked about these babies would get delivered alive and then they'd just get placed on these metal kidney dishes in the medical waste room with kind of like a cover over them, like a cloth, and a sign on the door that says, do not disturb, do not enter. And she would just go home and cry because it was just so hard to deal with.
Are the mothers who these babies belong to, are they told, one, this could happen, your baby could be born alive, and given an option as what they would want to do? Like, like if they wanted to hold the baby until it passed, or because I mean they still have to give birth, I'm assuming in every so you still have to give birth, and we've spoken on the podcast a few times about the body's process in something like that, and you know, actually knowing and seeing and viscerally feeling what is going on and how your body and your head can be so disconnected if you don't get that whole experience. So if that, like, is that an option given to women, or are they completely severed from that and it's no longer there?
I think it depends. I think it depends on the hospital. It depends on the abortionist. I've seen in some of the guidelines, it says that after 22 weeks, have a discussion with the mother that the child could come out alive if feticide isn't given. And certainly some women whose babies have a congenital abnormality, they will go in for the abortion but skip the feticide, deliver the baby alive and hold the baby until the baby dies. And the research shows that is so much better for the mother's recovery, isn't it? But it's obviously so much better for the baby to receive that care straight away on the mother's chest rather than being left alone. But not all mothers are given this information. So one story that I exposed on my Instagram was the story of baby Xantha. She was born at the Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital in 2020 at the start of COVID. She had Down syndrome and she was 19 weeks old. And so the parents went in to end her life because she had Down syndrome. 9 out of 10 babies with Down syndrome are killed through abortion. And so the mother delivered baby Xantha. They didn't tell her that she came out alive. She didn't know that she could come out alive. And so they whisked Xantha away and put her in an empty room on a kidney dish. And she lay there for 7 minutes. And the mother never found out at the time. But later, a hospital staff member made a casual remark about Xantha having lived. And then the mother actually became suicidal because it was obviously so traumatic. And I think of the mother and her plight. I also think of little Xantha laying there for 7 minutes because there's a couple of studies worldwide. One is a Canadian study that looked at 13,000 abortions. One of the babies in that study lived for 24 hours. So imagine living for 24 hours without care. Another study, which is of 241 late-term abortions, where feticide wasn't given first, so the injection was skipped. 1 in 2 babies came out alive. The average survival time was 32 minutes. One baby in that study survived for 267 minutes, which is over 4 hours. So we're talking about a considerable amount of time, and women aren't always told, but even if they are told, they don't necessarily want to interact with the child. And it is really a very kind of barbaric consequence of when you legislate abortion after 12 weeks. When you allow it after 12 weeks up until birth, these things are going to happen more. And another story that we know of is from Westmead Hospital, which is in New South Wales. And this little baby, the parents were told of a congenital heart defect at 20 weeks. So they went in for the abortion and the baby came out alive, and they held the baby for an hour. But after that, the chain of custody was lost, and this little baby was found in a medical waste bin some hours later breathing. Nobody knew how long this baby had been alive for in the bin. And the baby was then taken and wrapped and taken down to the hospital mortuary, and the baby eventually died. But the coroner, Janet Stevenson, she says in that judgment, she says there was a total abrogation of responsibility on behalf of the people who were meant to care for that child.
There is so many layers to this, and I feel like I'm sure you are very good at talking about it all the time, but like what would the alternative be? Like when we're looking at the picture of like, okay, these babies deserve all human rights, like they're born, they deserve the right to care. What in the perfect scenario would that look like?
Yeah, and that's the bill that I drafted, that I have introduced in Queensland, and then there's a federal bill that I was involved in that tries to create birth equality everywhere. So in the ideal scenario, if a baby is born and has signs of life, I think that they should be treated no differently to any other baby who's born with signs of life. So let's imagine you go into labour prematurely and have a baby born at 16 weeks. Now, that baby is not going to survive, but if I had a baby born at 16 weeks, I would wrap that baby, hold the baby, cuddle the baby till the baby passes. Now, we can't force, if abortion is legal at that gestation, we can't force necessarily a woman to do that, but we can provide a third party to do that. We could have volunteers, or it could be included in midwife patient ratios so that that baby is counted as a person and is a patient. So the baby comes out, there's a clinical assessment, you're 16 weeks, you're not going to survive, but let's wrap you up, cuddle you, you're gasping for air, let's maybe put a bit of morphine on the lips, and then the baby's breathing and heart rate will settle, and then the baby will eventually pass. And we don't dump the baby in a bin, we bury that baby or cremate that baby with a funeral, and they get a death certificate, so their personhood is recognised. If the baby is older than 22 weeks, the clinical assessment has to take into account that this baby could survive, and active resuscitation should be given. So they should, because that's normal for wanted babies at that age. And so, after 22 weeks and up until birth, we give care to those babies. They go to the NICU, and then if the mother chooses not to raise that child, the child can be placed for adoption. And it's not foster care. Foster care is a mess, whatever state you're in Australia. It's very sad. But the goal of foster care is family reunion. But if a mother in the hospital says, I don't want to raise my baby, then the baby will go into the adoption system. And there's thousands of couples that want to adopt. And then that baby goes to a permanent loving home. And that's the alternative. It's just basically treating the baby with the humanity and dignity that they deserve.
As opposed to putting them in the bin.
Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, I can see why people don't want to touch this topic, because it can get so sticky. And I've listening to some stories of women who have undergone abortions, all of them being pre-12 weeks that I've listened to. But, it was mentioned in one that women have worked so hard to get this body autonomy, which from what I've heard can also be debatable whether it is body autonomy or not, but to have this choice to choose whether they proceed with a pregnancy or not. And so when something this heartbreaking comes to light, I can see how there are so many who want to squash it, because it brings that level of, one, discomfort, but two, it actually opens up a whole range of other things that we do really need to question and iron out. It's not as simple as getting an abortion. It's so far from that's what it being.
No, and I think that's why the other side, I have found, really want to shut this one down. They just want to say it doesn't happen, or it's anti-abortion to want to give these babies care. I drafted a bill in South Australia which said that after 28 weeks, killing the baby would be illegal up until birth, but a woman could elect to terminate her pregnancy and deliver the baby alive rather than delivering dead. And that bill sadly lost by one vote a few weeks ago. But to me, it really underscored the fact that there are some people that are really ideologically driven around abortion, and they think that a mother has a right to a dead baby. And I just don't think that's where most Australians or most women sit. I do think that often our politicians are more radical on this than the people, and the people just don't know very much about it. And that's why we've been allowed to have these laws. It's kind of why I spoke up. I knew that it was career suicide and it was going to result in a lot of hate, and I've had a lot of death threats, and I've had 6 workplace investigations since I started doing it, because there's all these campaigns to get me sacked from the university. But I guess I just felt like if I didn't speak up, then where do we end this? How does this end, this story? Because we never thought abortion up to birth was something that we would ever do. In 1969, when abortion became legal, we just never thought that it would be available up to birth for any reason. And we never thought we would leave babies to die if they were born. And yet that is actually where we are, and it's being defined as healthcare. And there are bills by the Greens Party who want to have a constitutional right to abortion, but they also want to force doctors and nurses and midwives to do it even when they don't want to, because at the moment there is some conscience protection. I just think this gets really dystopian if we allow it to keep going.
And that's exactly what I wanted to say.
The perfect word.
It really is. And I think like this type of thing really deeply reflects where we're all at as a society. And I just think it's really reckless to go out with your pitchforks and scream, my body, my choice. And, you know, it's my right and women have fought for this. And like, but I don't think women genuinely know what they're actually fighting for anymore. Like, does a woman know that there's a chance that her baby will be born alive through abortion? Like, why is it a right to have these things? Like, I understand a lot of it. I can understand both sides. Like, if you accidentally get pregnant or something and you can maybe, but like for someone to just say, this affects my mental health, I'd like to kill this baby now at 28 weeks.
No, but it's not. They don't even voice it like that. It's, we're just going to remove the products of conception.
But like, I don't think that's a right. I think that is an entitlement, and I think that's really, I think that needs to be highlighted as like, it is not our right to outsource something that is happening to us because we may be able to. I don't think that's productive. I don't think that's proactive. I don't think that's progress. I actually think that is so harmful for women, and it might not be something that we feel now, but eventually the consequences is going to come out.
Is there any follow-up on the women who do choose late-term abortion on like their mental health, where they stand, like how they recover from that?
So there's been some studies which show that it is by far more traumatic than earlier abortion, and there's a lot of regret. But in terms of actual follow-up from hospitals, I don't think that there is, from what I understand. I've asked a few people that question. So I can't say it definitively, but from what I understand, it's not like you go in for the late-term abortion and then you're followed up. In terms of your mental health, I think you go in for the late-term abortion and then you leave. And I've actually had so many women reach out to me to say how traumatized they are by their abortion, like so many, even early term abortion. I had I organised like a national life summit at the Fuller Hotel in Sydney over the weekend, and there was 300 people that came, and a girl and her husband actually shared. They weren't married at the time. She was, I think, 16, 17 and got pregnant in her last year of school. And she went in for the counselling appointment, and the counsellor didn't tell her any of the information about the abortion methods or her baby at all. Like, there was none of that discussion. And then she went in for the abortion, and she took the first pill, and then they did a suction abortion. It was in the first trimester where they suction the baby out. And you know, the baby's body gets obliterated as it goes through the suction. But she's so traumatized by that. She ended up marrying the guy, and they've got 2 kids, but they both were reflecting on the fact that when they had the abortion, everybody told them, you've got to have an abortion. Your life will be over if you have this baby. You know, your career will be over. It will be ruined. And they're looking at each other now thinking, well, we've got 2 children. He's working as a carpenter. At this point, she's a stay-at-home mum. They're both married to the love of their life. They've just managed to get in the property door and buy a property, which was a bit of a miracle because their income's not high. But they're like, well, how much would our life have been ruined by a third baby, a 7-year-old running around in addition to our 3-year-old and our 6-month-old? Like, actually, it would have been richer, and there's so much grief for them to not have this 7-year-old running around. And women just are told this, and most of the abortions are for socioeconomic reasons. They are not to save the life of the mother. Most of the time it is because of a mental health reason to do with different factors that the woman might be facing. And we don't deal with the root problems. We just say, let's kill your baby and then you're going to be fine. But typically the women are not fine, and it doesn't actually solve things for them. You know, if they're in a situation of domestic violence and then there's another act of violence where that baby is killed, they're still going back home to that situation of violence. No one's resolved that situation for them. So there can be real naivety around the question of abortion. And I think that when Roe v. Wade was overturned in the US, women just, it was like women just thought that they have to believe this and support it unconditionally. Otherwise, they're letting down the sisterhood. And it's actually just not true. But it's very hard to get the information out through the mainstream media.
I think that's something that I'd like to touch on, because it was a common thread that I heard in it was a podcast dedicated to abortion stories, and all the women that came on this or the stories that I had listened to, and I tried to select a wide variety, but I have 5 children, can't listen to it in front of them and only have so much time. But one common thread was that all of them were very pro-choice. A number of them felt pressured into their abortion, and even though they were pro-choice, they felt that they didn't have autonomy over their body because this was an option, and there was a lot of pressure coming from the partner or from family. There was not enough support around it, and just listening to women go through that, and these were all early stories as well, but the trauma that these women were feeling from it, and even like those who went into it not really understanding what the process was, but were like very, very determined to not have a baby, whatever the stage of their life was in or current circumstances. And afterwards, they were traumatized by the experience of it because they weren't fully informed about what the process was and how connected they would feel to their pregnancy and to their baby. And I think, when we talk about abortion, and I want to say too right now that I am not against I'm not against people making those decisions, but I am really, really for informed choice and also looking at all the options, and I just don't think there is enough of a voice out there about what this can do to women and what the aftermath is, because it's not just ending the pregnancy or ending the life of a baby that you might be able to just have later. Like it's a lot more than that. Your body experiences a lot more than that, and when it does, your head experiences a lot more than that. So
and I think it's like, if you're listening to this and you feel triggered because you've had an abortion, a lot of people were young and had abortions because they had a one-night stand or they had no job, or there's multitude of reasons why people made those choices when they were younger or recently or whatever. And I don't think this whole conversation is about like, well, you're a bad person. It's like, if you've had an abortion, think about like, would you have liked to have known at that time that this outcome may occur, and what would you like to do about it? Like, I just think the downplaying of what it actually is kind of like the part that needs to be kind of discussed, because I feel like while we're all so busy arguing like pro women's rights and whatever, just like we're so hooked on what we think is the right thing without even really getting to the grit of it, or like discussing, really having these conversations like, what is abortion? Like, what's going to happen to you if you have an abortion? What could happen to that? Or like, you know, like this is the crux of like where I think the change can actually, it's possible that there can be some change, or at best, you just really don't want the baby. You've made a mistake, an accident's occurred. At least you've got informed choice. It cancels out a lot of possibility for freaking traumas. And, you know,
there's a lot of research to show a woman an ultrasound of her baby and then give her a 24 to 72 hour waiting period, she will not go through with the abortion. And I think that if we were really honest with women, that number of 88,000 abortions would dramatically decrease. And I guess one thing I would like to offer as a counter argument, because people will say, well, I'm uncomfortable personally with abortion and I wouldn't have one, but I'm not going to impose that on anybody else. But my goal is actually to make abortion unthinkable, because we support women 100% and we give them what they need to thrive, and whatever vulnerability they're facing in a crisis pregnancy, we meet that need. But we recognise that when a woman is pregnant, there are two distinct human beings who have human rights, and we need to safeguard both. And, you know, we wouldn't say, I won't have slaves, but it's okay for you to keep them. We're at a point in human society and human history where we recognise that slavery should be unthinkable and should be illegal because it is subjugating another human being for my economic gain and prosperity. In the same way, intentionally killing a human being, no matter how small, vulnerable, or where they're located, is an unacceptable act. And I know people on this call who are listening are going to find that very difficult. And I do want to say I don't judge people for having abortions. I actually do judge the doctors. Like I think that they know what they're doing. They're not in a position of vulnerability. They're doing this for a job, and they actually know what they're doing. And if you're a doctor who intentionally starves a baby to death in the first trimester, or obliterates their body through suction in the first trimester, or breaks their body apart with metal forceps, or deliberately delivers them alive and leaves them to die, I just think that is not healthcare. That's not the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. And you're actually really hurting women and our society by being involved in that act. And I think it's important that we're just honest. Kamala Harris just ran an entire campaign about reproductive health care without ever saying the word abortion. And I just think we, as women, are intelligent enough to have this conversation honestly. And it's going to be a difficult conversation, but it's one that we should be having.
Yeah, well, I mean, like we talk about, I mean, this is kind of taking it in a different direction, but we're always talking about like, you know, how unfortunately, as much as women are like stuck in this program of thinking like feminism, my body, freedom, I can do whatever I want, I don't need this, like all of that stuff. It's like a lot of these issues are layered down and come back to like, you know, women needing to do a lot of things differently, and a lot of that is just coming together and actually supporting each other and not, you know, I just feel like engaging with the conversation around these things is quite, I don't see it as progress. I feel it's like, let's understand it and let's actually figure out what is going on here and why we are actually in a position where we are of 88,000 scenarios where we just don't want this baby, or we've done this, we've found ourselves. And I mean, Keshia, I know you listen to a lot of podcasts with the abortion stories, about a lot of these women actually felt like they wanted the baby, but their partners didn't. And like this even just comes down to like, women, what are we doing? Having sexual relations with men who you don't want a baby with, or you don't think is going to be a good dad, or this man is not courting you and desperate to start a family with you. Like it needs to come way, way back to those
taking responsibility
conversations and those responsibilities. And like, you know, this is a different conversation to women who intentionally get pregnant and then their baby, you know, and this is a whole another conversation. But if your baby, I mean, someone tells you that your baby's going to die, or if you, like, there's a lot of things that get said and done that probably aren't correct either, and they can be challenged, but that's a different scenario, right? We can talk about that in a different lens, but, you know, just accidentally getting in a position, like we need to talk about that as well.
Well, I think it's one thing to talk to your children about, if like worst case scenario, you can have an abortion, versus like, actually, when you go into a relationship and if you're old enough to be having intercourse, the product of intercourse is generally a child. So take that with a grain of salt. Like, let's not be flippant about this. Let's be like, and that would be ideally taking full responsibility for your actions so that you are prepared then for, I mean, the potential life-changing circumstances of that sexual encounter, which is something that I also noticed in these stories. Like no one ever spoke about taking responsibility for their sexual encounters. And I know that, you know, there are situations where we can put every method in place and still end up pregnant. And that is just the way it can go sometimes. But, you know, if we're switched on to, okay, this is what can happen, like, then you're a bit more prepared rather than it being like, no, just as many sexual encounters as you want in however many ways you desire. And it is a really multi-leveled,
it's so much.
86% of abortions, women who get abortions in the US, they collect this data, come in without a partner, so they don't have a man in their life supporting them. One of the biggest drivers of whether a woman will have an abortion is either because a man is forcing her, so it's not really autonomy, empowerment, or she has someone that's abandoned her and is not supportive. My message to my children, so my oldest daughter turns 14 on Sunday, and we talk about this stuff a fair bit. So first of all, I educate my children on abortion and the abortion methods, because that's quite important. I think that they know what it is, because they're not going to get that information from anywhere else. They're not going to get it from the media or sex ed at school. Their friends probably won't know what's accurate. So I actually show, there's a website called abortionprocedures.com, and it goes through the methods. And I think it's important to either show them to your children or explain them to your children so that they know, because if they go through with something like that down the track, or if they have sex with this idea that, I could just get an abortion as worst case scenario, it's very important that they know what it is. I just think that's an important part of being a good parent. So I explain it, but I also say to my daughter and my son, you don't just have sex casually, because yes, it can produce a child, and that's a distinct, unrepeatable individual human being that is half you. And sex is something really special, and that is something that's in the context of a really loving, faithful relationship with someone who really respects you. But then I also say, if you do get pregnant because you haven't followed mum's advice, then you need to know that I want to know, and I will not be upset at you, and I will love that little baby, and mum and dad will help you achieve your dreams, and we will help raise that baby. Just that is something that we also say as well, because we don't want our kids to feel like we can't tell our parents this stuff. You have to keep those lines of communication open. And we're watching the Gilmore Girls at the moment, my daughter and I, and we're up to, have you guys seen Gilmore Girls? No, a bit. Some people will.
A couple of episodes.
This is the episode in season 3 where the mother who got pregnant as a teenager and had her baby, so it's actually very pro-life, because you see how beautiful her life is having been a teen mum. But there was struggle, but it is beautiful. But she's having a conversation with her own 16-year-old daughter, who's telling her, I think I might have sex with my boyfriend. And instead of actually having a proper conversation, she just sort of says, yeah, thanks for telling me. And it's like, I paused it, and my daughter and I had a bit of a chat, and we were like, well, what are the things she should have said? And, I think that's the thing about being really close to your children and having honest communication with them about this stuff.
Yeah, I think we're just coming full circle, aren't we? Every time we have a conversation that's something like this about taking more responsibility, and ultimately we're so fundamentally about stopping the outsource of our, when we fuck up, someone's not there. It's really not the doctor. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of midwives and doctors and people who are absolutely fucking traumatized at having to clean up the mess of someone who and I just feel like we are always about, this whole podcast is really just about looking at yourself in the mirror. It's no one's job to save you. It is no one's job that is entitlement. It is not a right. It's not we don't get to be flippant. We've used that word so much in this episode, but we don't actually get to do whatever we want and then call it a right to whatever we want. And regardless if you think that you're entitled or whatever that thought may be, but we really need to just there are consequences to things
and there's responsibilities that come with being human and being a parent. Parents have obligations to their offspring, and the minute you conceive a child, you are a parent, and you can't, no abortion is going to change that and fix that for you, or magically whitewash it away. You are a parent, and you have obligations not to harm your child.
Wow, there is so much here, and so lots of layers, and a lot of what we've said is probably going to trigger a lot of people and come across as extreme anti-abortionists.
Can I say though, one in every 4 women in Australia will have an abortion. That apparently that is a stat. Is that something that would resonate with what?
Yeah, that statistic is true. But some of those women, it'll be conflated by the fact that some are having multiple abortions. I do think that this is about cultural change, right? Like people think, oh, well, you just want to ban abortion. It's actually not really about that. It's about opening people's eyes up through education and then culturally driving change. And it takes time for these things to change. And these are important conversations to have. So I'm very grateful to you guys for having me on. And if people are interested in finding out more of my stuff, you can look at my Instagram and TikTok, Facebook, YouTube and X at Dr. Joanna Howe. I've also got a website with fact sheets on it. I'm not intending to bulldoze people because I just don't think that's, like we live in a democracy, so no one's trying to ban anything. But I am trying to produce an Australia where abortion is unthinkable because we've had our eyes opened to it. And I think there's this famous abortionist. He was actually part of the case for Roe v. Wade. He wanted abortion to be legal up to birth in America. And he was part of the early abortion rights group there, and he performed thousands of abortions. But when ultrasound technology came in the 80s, he performed an ultrasound abortion, and that was when he had this moment of conviction of, I can't do this. And he said, it's a famous quote of his, if wombs had windows, there would be far fewer abortions. And I think if we opened our eyes and really contemplated what we were doing, then we would move to a place where that number is not 88,000 babies a year being killed. It would be far, far less. Because we would find another way.
Yeah, 100%. And I also just think if we were we had that awareness of that responsibility, it would actually really empower us in the way that we false sense. What am I trying to say? Like at the moment, I feel like it's a false sense of empowerment. But the moment we actually have this awareness of like, okay, well, that is actually a true reality of what abortion looks like. If you can make choices based on that truth, I think that is actual real empowerment. And a lot of us are going to fight about that and, dismiss what we all have to say or our arguments or like our just determination to be fucking right even when you don't really know what you're talking about. I think, like we're all women and we all want the best for women and we all want to progress as like, actual deeply empowered women. But I think there's just a lot to actually look at. You can't do that if you don't actually know the truth. You don't actually know what's going on. So as hard as it is to probably digest this. It's
been a 20-year journey for me, and people have been listening to this conversation about 60 minutes, and I think hopefully it's planted a seed and sparks a journey for people listening.
Joanna, if anyone wants to support you and your work, are there pathways to be able to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking that question. You can go to my website, drjoannahowe.com/join, and the doctor is just DR. And you can join my email list and database. There's ways to donate there to the work, but also following me on social media and just sharing it. I think you guys heard about me because somebody shared it with you. So that is a great way to just kind of spread the word and get a conversation going.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been like heart-wrenching, but also it is needed because I am the first to say that I was so in the dark about this. I honestly did not know that abortion up to birth was a thing. I'm pretty shocked by that alone. So thank you for sharing this information with us and with our listeners. And
it's been great to talk with you guys. I sort of compartmentalize because I talk about it every day now, but sometimes I allow myself to feel it, and it is really horrible.
No doubt. All right, thank you everyone.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Road to Wisdom podcast. To join the journey, you can follow us on Instagram at theroadtowisdom.podcast and at www.theroadtowisdompodcast.com. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. We look forward to seeing you next week with more juicy content.